Hello and welcome to From the South. I'm Alejandra Garcia from teleSUR Studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Venezuela, the legislature unanimously rejected the coercive measure supported by the extreme right-wing opposition following the revocation of the license of the U.S. oil company Chevron to operate in the country. More details with our colleague Leonardo Urrieta.
Todas las bancadas de las distintas tendencias políticas.
All the benches of the different political tendencies in the National Assembly expressed their rejection of this new measure of the U.S. government against the U.S. oil company Chevron, revoking its license to operate in Venezuela. The parliamentarians of the government party support the declarations of President Nicolas Maduro, where he assured that these sanctions against the U.S. oil company were promoted by a reduced sector of the opposition related to the international extreme right.
Aquí está. A su servicio y a sus órdenes, la ley orgánica.
Here it is, at your service and at your orders, the Simón Bolívar Liberator Organic Law against the imperialist blockade and in defense of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. We urge, dear prosecutor, that this law be applied and that all those who have promoted these actions against Venezuela pay with jail, pay with disqualifications, pay with the law of forfeiture of ownership, that the full weight of this law fall upon them.
Que caiga sobre ellos todo el peso de esta ley.
Los diputados a la Asamblea Nacional.
The deputies to the National Assembly recall that the more than 1,000 illegal sanctions applied by Washington will not stop the will of the Venezuelan people to be free and sovereign.
Venezuelans are courageous men and women. We are libertarian men and women. We are men and women who of course profess the self-determination of peoples, and in this context we will not accept imposition of any nature.
We the workers are ready, prepared to assume responsibility for production in Venezuela, including the entire productive class at the national level.
For its part,
the alternative democratic opposition, which is active in the legislative branch, condemned in a united manner that some extremist spokespersons are calling for economic sanctions against Venezuela.
The bad thing is that there are Venezuelans who ask for this to happen. The bad thing is that there are Venezuelans who are happy with this. The bad thing is that there are Venezuelans who aspire to be deputies, governors and the legislative council and want the country to go bad. And that there are sanctions, but they have double morals. They talk horrorously about the country, but tomorrow we see them wanting to register to be candidates for governors and mayors.
And then these pseudo-leaders go to the United States to ask Donald Trump, to ask the great powers to also come and sanction Venezuela? Do they not feel sympathy? Do they not have a heart? Do they not have children? Do they not have mothers, fathers, elderly people in their homes?
Venezuela will grow and prevail in the face of the constant attacks of the U.S. imperialism and its allies in Venezuela. This was stated by the deputy and historical parliamentary leader of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, Fernando Soto Rojas.
We
will resist and we will win. We know that imperialism cannot be granted even a little bit. As Che Guevara said, we will continue developing our national industry, our national economy, strengthening the Bolivarian revolution.
The Venezuelan state as a whole warns that any Venezuelan who calls for sanctions against the country will be punished based on the provisions of the Simón Bolívar Organic Law to protect Venezuela from the attacks of the White House.
En la Cámara de Carlos Quintero, Leonardo Urrieta, teleSUR, Caracas, Venezuela.
At least 22 people were killed Thursday in a series of armed attacks in Guayaquil in the coastal region of Ecuador. The attack, considered by police forces to be one of the most violent in recent years, took place in the district of Nueva Prosperina in the afternoon. According to the national police, it was a confrontation between factions of the criminal group known as Los Tiguerones. This event, already baptized as the worst massacre in Guayaquil, occurred 4 days after the government of President Daniel Noboa renewed the state of emergency for another 30 days, precisely to alleviate the insecurity crisis that plagues the nation. In southern Chile, the Mapuche fighter Gabriel Toro died in the line of duty while he was trying to put out the ravaging wildfires in the Araucanía region. The Mapuche firefighter was taken to the Victoria Hospital, where he passed away as he had been seriously injured by a falling tree in the Ercilla community. The presidential delegate for the Araucanía region, Domingo Abdala Abarzúa, confirmed the facts. The authority further unfolded that experts would perform an autopsy on Toro's body in Temuco City. And now we have a short break coming up, but first remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you'll find news in different formats, news updates and more. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. In China, Foreign Minister Wang Yi assured his country would continue to retaliate against arbitrary tariffs by the United States and accused Washington of made good with evil. On the sidelines of the country's annual parliamentary session, Wang said China's efforts to help the United States contain its fentanyl crisis have been met with punitive tariffs, which are straining ties between the countries. In this context, the foreign minister stressed that no country should fantasize that it can crack down on China and maintain a good relationship at the same time, also expressing that these acts are not good for the stability of bilateral relations or for building mutual trust. The two countries have engaged in tit-for-tat retaliatory tariffs since U.S. President Donald Trump's return to power in January.
Mutual respect is the basic norm governing the relations between states and also an important prerequisite of China-U.S. relations. No country should fantasize that it can suppress China and maintain good relationship with China at the same time. Such two-faced acts are not good for the stability of bilateral relations or for building mutual trust. The abuse of fentanyl in the U.S. is a problem that must be confronted and resolved by the U.S. itself. In the spirit of humanity, China assisted U.S. in various ways. The U.S. should not meet good with evil or even impose arbitrary tariffs. No responsible major country should do that.
The foreign minister also stressed that China and the U.S. should seek a peaceful way to coexist.
China-U.S. business relations are mutually equal. Cooperation will bring mutual benefit and win-win. If the U.S. continues to exert pressure, China will definitely take countermeasures too. As the world's biggest developing country and world's biggest developed country respectively, China will and the U.S. will stay on this planet for long. They must seek peaceful coexistence.
March 5th marked the 65th anniversary of the famous photograph of Che Guevara taken by Alberto Corda. The story of this photograph has gone far beyond being a simple image, becoming most a symbol of revolution and freedom. More details in the report by our colleague Oleg Jasinski.
The iconic photograph of Che Guevara was taken on March 5th, 1960 by Cuban photographer Alberto Corda during a memorial service for the victims of the L'Aqsa ship explosion in Havana. The photograph went around the world, and the Soviet Union was no exception.
When you look at the picture, you can see in the eyes the desire to change everything, and it's something that floods you. The photo is about this, and it's really very interesting and full of meaning.
Today, more than ever, the words of Che, who called the United States and its government the enemy of humanity, make sense. In today's Russia, which has had to confront these same forces of the imperialist West, the image of Che reminds us that our peoples and our cultures continue this struggle, which is not only for one country or another, but for the whole of humanity.
I have always liked Che Guevara as a person. He was not only a fighter for justice and a military man, as he proved to be. But he was a very intelligent and cultured person, who used not only strength but also his brain.
Не силой только, а своими мозгами тоже.
Произошла перестройка. Развал Союза.
When perestroika began, the Soviet Union collapsed, and it was then that Che Guevara went from being an exotic legend to being a real and powerful figure who, right under the nose of the world hegemon, defied it, stood his ground, fought and won.
Который под самым носом у мирового гегемона бросил этому гегемону вызов, выстоял.
Even his death, ultimately, also became his moral victory.
Она ведь тоже в конечном итоге стала его моральной победой.
El Che sigue siendo muy cercano para millones de rusos.
Che is still very close to millions of Russians. For some, his story was a way of discovering Latin America, a bridge of human contact with the Latin American people. For others, Che's dream of the construction of a new man, essential for true social change, remains a challenge and an urgent need that continues to be worked on. Thus, Che became one more citizen of the people who made the October Revolution and defeated fascism.
Che Guevara visited Russia many times during the Soviet era. Many of the places he visited still exist, and there are living people with whom he spoke. Today in bookstores in Russia you can find his books or books dedicated to his life. And just as before, the name and image of Che Guevara inspire people fighting for social justice.
For Russians, this legendary man is connected with the expression of the highest moral values that live in our heart, in our hearts, in our reasons.
El sueño del Che hoy desde las estepas de Donbass.
Che's dream today, from the steppes of Donbass to the African savannas and the mountains of America, continues to unite our people for the construction of a more dignified world. And the more time separates us from the time of Che. Here, in Russia, the beloved presence of the heroic guerrilla becomes more and more relevant and closer to us.
teleSUR.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has refused to endorse part of the European Union summit declaration in favor of Ukraine and claims that it is the European Union that has isolated itself. The Prime Minister's statements come after European Union leaders emerged from a summit in Brussels pledging to work together to strengthen the continent's defenses and released hundreds of billions of euros for security and aid to Ukraine. In this context, the Hungarian Prime Minister declared that the European Union has isolated itself from the United States, China and Russia, unlike his country. Orbán also insisted that Europe cannot both spend more for its own defense and security and help Ukraine financially.
So the isolation is relevant to the European Union. So the European Union has isolated itself from the United States now, isolated himself from China because of the trade war, and isolated himself from Russia because of the sanction policy. So if somebody is isolated here, is the European Union as such. Hungary has a good relation to all three directions, so we are not isolated at all.
We have a second short break coming up, but we'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Israeli occupation forces imposed severe restrictions on Muslim worshippers at Al-Aqsa mosque during the first Friday prayer of the holy month of Ramadan. Precisely, access to one of the holiest sites for Muslims has been restricted, with Israeli forces detaining thousands of Palestinian worshippers while settlers are allowed to walk freely and on the esplanade. In this context, many worshippers have circumvented the restrictions through the Kalandia checkpoint, where troops are also denying access to men under 55 years of age. The actions constitute another violation of the fragile ceasefire by the Zionist regime. United Nations experts condemned Israel's decision to prevent the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza, marking this as a clear violation of international law. Specialists warn that these decisions come from the Zionist governments undermine any possibility of peace. According to them, the deliberate cutting off of food and the constant threats in the middle of the holy month of Ramadan is not only evidence of extreme cruelty, but points to a clear attempt to end the ceasefire agreement reached in Qatar. The president of Cuba, Miguel Díaz-Canel, received on Thursday at the Palace of the Revolution in Havana the ambassadors of the Arab and Islamic countries accredited in the country. This is the second year in a row that the Cuban head of state has welcomed representatives of this diplomatic corps during the holy month of Ramadan. The meeting was a testimony to the excellent level of bilateral relations. At the meeting, authorities of the Caribbean island expressed their best wishes for well-being and prosperity, while the ambassador of Yemen to Cuba and delegations head Mohammed Saleh Nasser reiterated the position of his community of nations against the blockade and the inclusion of Cuba in the notorious list drawn up by Washington for countries that allegedly sponsor terrorism. The Bogotana Art Collective reflects on the political and social reality not only of Colombia but the world, making use of humor and satire. It intends to carry strong messages that allow us to think beyond the image. Let's see details with our correspondent Hernán Trovar.
La Bogotana, colectivo comunicativo y
The
artístico.
Bogotana, a communicative and artistic collective, arose from the idea of a group of young people who, observing their surroundings, look for a way to transmit social awareness through suggestive images that would call the attention of a young audience to question their reality and reflect on political and social issues that are often ignored by the youth.
Vale la pena apostarle a otro mundo. Vale la pena apostarle a...
It is worth betting on another world. It is worth betting on the fact that it is not normal for a person to be on the street sleeping without a roof and without food. It is not fair that 1% of the planet has the wealth of the rest and much less so here in Colombia, where inequality is extrapolated to a level that one cannot even imagine. I think this has made us want to move. The system we have is not fair. We have to look for another way to make this work.
No es justo el sistema que tenemos, hay que buscar otra manera de que esto funcione.
Este colectivo emerge en el año 2021 con
This collective emerged in the year 2021 with a social outburst that led to the awakening of young people to a series of neoliberal policies that were detrimental to the popular class and promoted by the government of Iván Duque. That and the different events that challenged the establishment with mobilizations, sit-ins, and marches throughout Colombia serve for the creation of illustrations and videos that gave account of the awakening of a country that for a long time remained asleep.
En el caso de la Bogotana, pues fue importante porque mucho
In the case of the Bogotana, it was very important because much of the work we had done was multiplied. We worked hard to produce pieces every day, to produce videos, illustrations, posters, to be there giving everything for the cause, to be in the street, to be registering, and yes, obviously the strike worked a lot for the country to start a stage of change. I think that is where we are now.
También para que el país empezara como en una etapa de cambio, que creo que es en la que estamos ahorita.
Un proyecto comunicativo que se basa en el diseño.
This is a communicative project based on graphic design and illustration, to which documentaries and animation have been added, aiming to ground the political sphere in pop culture by adding humor. This in order to break the belief that politics is boring and seeking to entertain with various pieces where you are enticed to reflect from the humorous side, not only with national issues, but international, and that draws on foreign technique for graphic relevance.
Pues hay como un gran movimiento que fue como el movimiento de...
There is a great movement that was the Russian and Chinese poster art that occurred in the socialist governments that existed there, and that had a great influence on propaganda in general and poster art in the social movement worldwide during the last 40 or 50 years.
En el movimiento social a nivel mundial durante los últimos 40, 50 años. De ahí obviamente tomamos muchos elementos.
From there we obviously took many elements, colors, textures, ways of composing, but we have also mixed them with the comic, with the cartoon, with the television series we saw as children, with the cinema, to be able to give it a twist and not to stay in what it was, but to begin to give it another form.
Ahí que, pues, para poder darles un vuelco y que no se quede en lo que estaba, sino empezar a darle otra forma.
La bogotana ha sabido hacer uso eficiente de las redes
The
sociales.
Bogotana has been able to make efficient use of social networks, in the street, in the case of posters, to publicize their visual and audiovisual art pieces, an essential tool to disseminate and expand their target audience, which is no longer only young people, but also contemporary adults, which has allowed their pieces to be visualized and known much more widely.
Mucho más en el mundo. Hernán Darío Tobar Gaitán, TeleSUR, Bogotá, Colombia.
And we have come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net, and join us on social media. We are on Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram and TikTok as well. For TeleSUR English, I'm Alejandra Garcia. Thank you for watching.